I am a romance novel fan. I read romance novels and love the whole, are they going to get together? Are they going to get together? Okay, they got together and it's a happy ending, right? Like it's
Uh-huh.
formulaic, but it's formulaic for a reason because that's what the fans want. Well, the reason the fans want that is because that sort of fantasy, and it is a fantasy, not to say that it can't happen in real life, because I have my own happily ever after going on right now, thank goodness. But it is a fantasy, right? And it's a fantasy that we as humans can all identify with.
Hello and welcome to CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers that built our nerd culture. What makes a good science fiction story click? Today I have with me sci-fi author and fellow South Dakotan Kacey Ezell. Kacey is here to talk about her latest anthology book, No Game for Knights, co-edited with author Larry Correia. This unique collection of stories coming from different authors explores the fantasy and science fiction genre through a hard-boiled noir detective lens. Kacey also has written several other books and stories, collaborating with other big-name authors like Christopher L. Smith, the John Ringo, and more. She's an accomplished author with lots of insights to share. So today we are going to talk about her latest projects, of course, but also her writing journey, her tips for aspiring writers, and what makes a good science fiction story click. Thank you, Kacey, for coming on the show. I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. I love talking about this kind of stuff. So
Yeah, no, I love a good anthology book. I think I love, a lot. There are a lot more anthology books when you think of science fiction, the classic era, so like the 40s through the 60s. And I think they kind of just got out of fashion, but a
yeah,
really great anthology book, you showcase a lot of different authors. It can really give you a better idea of how far the genre can go. And it gives you, I don't know, I think sometimes smaller projects works better for some authors. And so, like, you could really showcase their writing talents like yourself. So,
absolutely. And I do know that one of the benefits of writing in an anthology like this is that, especially for newer authors, you get the opportunity to kind of show what you can do and build your audience a little bit, because someone may buy this book because they're a Larry Correia fan, a Monster Hunter International fan, and this, they buy this book because there's an MHI story in there, but then they get exposed to stories by all kinds of people, and I think they're all great. So so hopefully the readers do too, and check out some new favorites. So
yeah, awesome. Uh, I see that you are from my home state of South Dakota. You're a
yeah,
military brat, right? So are you? I was a
yes,
military brat, Air Force. Are you also Air Force?
yes, I am. Yeah. Where did you grow up? Well, I know that's a loaded question. I claim Sturgis as my hometown. Let's start there.
Okay. Yeah, no. My family was in Rapid when
Uh-huh.
my dad was stationed in the missile officer program.
At
Um,
Ellsworth.
Yeah, up in
Yeah.
Ellsworth. Now, yeah, that all there's they've cut back on some of those bases, so now I think one of them is a museum, and
Yeah.
it's a lot smaller than it used to be.
Yeah, it is. It is. Although they still have the bomb wing there. So Ellsworth is still fairly
Yeah,
vibrant as far as.
Ellsworth itself is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't know. I haven't met a lot of South Dakotans, so that always I really
It's
appreciate that.
yeah. No, it's fun. It's fun to fun to rep the home state and everything. So
Yeah.
I still have family out there. My mom and my stepdad live in Belle Fourche in the Northern Hills, and then my two of my dad's brothers and his sister still live in Sturgis. So we like to get back there when we can, because it's absolutely beautiful out there in the Black Hills.
Do you stay there for the motorcycle rally, or do you leave town like most most to Sturgis?
So I haven't been to the rally in a number of years. It is a good time, and it's one of those things that I recommend that people do at least once in their lifetime. But at this particular season of life, it's not totally the kind of thing we want to spend our vacation days doing.
Yeah, no, I understand, because people either really love it or they really hate it, and
Yeah,
there's not really a lot of room in between.
Well, and it is a really good time, and there are portions of it that are perfectly family friendly, and there are portions of it that are absolutely 100% not family friendly. So
Yes.
you just kind of have to know where you're
Yes.
going.
I I remember one time we were driving through, my younger brother, it was an early teenager, and we drove by and it was like a full nude body painting
Yep.
competition. It was just right there out in the open in Hill
Oh yes.
City, and he was in his face. It was like,
So
yeah, that's
yeah,
kind of what happens out here. It gets a little crazy.
that's the rally. Yeah, no, it's pretty funny because I go to Dragon Con every year. Started going as a fan, and then managed to convince them that I was professional enough to get attending pro status the last couple of years. And
Nice.
Dragon Con is also it gets quite crazy, particularly after about 10 p.m. when most of the kids go back to the hotel. Well, hopefully all the kids go back to the hotel room
Yep.
and go to bed. But it's they call it Dragon Con after dark, and it's crazy. But yeah, I've definitely seen worse in Sturgis. So,
Okay, so that's kind of a fun way to start. So, it's kind of crazy that you are a science fiction author. It's hard enough to make a living as a writer or an author, but being a science fiction author, that's a whole different ball game. So, what inspired you to become a writer? What were the kind of stuff that you were interested growing up?
So I was one of those little kids who I read very early, and then once I started reading, I was absolutely voracious. I would read anything I could get my hands on, and my mother was a big science fiction fan, still is a big science fiction fan and a fantasy fan. And one day I was bothering her, and
Eh.
she put a copy of Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Drums into my hands. Was like, here, go away and read this. It's for kids. And if you're not familiar, Dragon Drums is actually book 3 of a YA trilogy that Anne McCaffrey wrote, set in her Dragon Riders of Pern universe. And so she started me off on book 3 because that would happen to be the one that she had, laying around the house. And I was hooked. I absolutely fell in love with the world. I fell in love with the dragons and the fire lizards, and I decided pretty much then and there that I wanted to grow up to be a dragon rider, and also that I wanted to write science fiction and fantasy stories. And and I was I think I was 7 when I first read Dragon Drums, and then once she saw how much I loved it, my mom got me the rest of the series and the other books, and in the full Dragon Riders of Pern series, and I read those again voraciously right away. So right around that time, I was like, this fired up my imagination. This is what I want to do. And also I want it to be real. Please and thank you. So I,
We can all dream. We can all hope.
right. Yeah. I was also kind of strangely logical for, I guess at this point I was probably around 9, for a 9-year-old. And I was like, well, there's not a lot of dragons around. So I guess I'll fly aircraft instead, because,
It only
again,
took 2 years, though. It only took you 2 years to figure out dragons.
well, it took me
Or
about that long to collect all the books and then read them all. So,
okay,
so, but yeah, and I say I was 9 because I remember, so my parents were in the Air Force, and we were at the time stationed overseas in the Philippines, and my dad took me to an air show there at Clark Air Base, and I think the Thunderbirds performed, and I remember watching it, and that was sort of the moment that I had the epiphany that, like, well, I can't get my hands on a dragon egg, but I could probably learn to fly one of those. And so that was the moment that I was like, okay, I'm going to be a pilot because I want to ride dragons, and that's as close as I can get. I didn't end up becoming a jet pilot because, later on I decided helicopters sounded like more fun. So that's quite literally the super nerdy and embarrassing reason why I, you know, that charted the course of my entire life, basically, because all of my decisions were based on, okay, what do I need to do to learn to fly? Where do I need to go to school? What do I need to do to get into that school? What do I need to do once I graduate? Those kinds of things. Um, and the whole time I'm writing stories, right, in my head, writing them in telling them to friends of mine. When I was in college, I discovered the wild world of Anne McCaffrey Pern fan fiction
Oh
online.
my gosh,
And
that is a controversial topic.
yeah. And got involved in some of the fan fiction clubs, and met some really great friends. One of whom is one of my best friends to this day, and co-author Marisa Wolf. We've written 3 books together so far, and counting. Um, and and it all kind of started because, like I said, these stories that I read as a kid fired up my imagination and made me invested in, who are these people? Who are these characters? What happens to them? Why do they make these decisions? And and you know, as I grew up, it was just sort of, I think, a natural extension of that sort of curiosity and investment in that, because I write the stories I want to read, right? I explore characters that I find interesting still to this day. So
No, that's a good origin story. It's funny that you were writing or into Anne McCaffrey fan fiction, because Anne McCaffrey, one of the things, she's famous, of course, for the Pern novels. By the way, the Dragons of Pern are they're pretty good, I think, overall. It's kind of like it's almost like a fantasy stories, but they're technically set in a sci-fi universe.
yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing she's famous for is suing people for writing stuff about her work. She was one of the authors first that that really tried to not let fan fiction be a thing. She legally, for whatever reason, she really hated the idea of fan fiction, and she was like one of the first big authors that really went out there. And fortunately, she lost that fight, but her books are still pretty good.
Yeah, she did. So by the time I came into the fan fiction community, those events had all already settled out. And one of the things that I found interesting was it was almost like there was an ethical balance there for, okay, here's where fan fiction should go, here's where it shouldn't go. And to this day, I mean, obviously, we're all always colored by our early experiences, but to this day, that's still a distinction that exists in my mind, is that, ethical fan fiction is fan fiction that, first of all, the owner of the property does not ever see, does not ever read, right? Because then there's no question of idea stealing, or not that that's possible, but you know what I mean? No question of plagiarism involved or anything like that. And it's fan fiction that, in Anne's case, she requested of the community, don't use any of my characters. And by and large, at least the groups that I was a part of and knew of, everybody pretty much respected that, because it was like, okay, fine, we won't use any of your canon characters. Everything that we do is our, our own sort of alternate canon. And we just play in your backyard, essentially. So I'm very grateful to those early experiences and to the fan fiction community, because I learned so much in the process of writing those stories about how to create characters that other people find appealing, and how to create sympathy for characters, how to build a backstory, how to interact with other characters, how to build tension and drama in a scene. A lot of that stuff, like I learned just from doing it in that fan fiction milieu.
No, that's exactly right. This is kind of one of the things I really like about nerd culture and this, like science fiction writing, fantasy writing, stuff that are in that purview. It's like there is this kind of tradition, like people who came before are making you interested in the thing you're into, and that they're kind of like passing that on to you, which inspires other people to go ahead and do it. And fan fiction, look, people make fun of fan fiction a lot, but it is the training ground for a lot of authors, a lot more people than you probably think. I'm not sure that many authors usually want to own up to that, but it is true. It is
I have no shame. It's fine.
Yeah. The only way you can get good at something, you don't instantly start at your level, or Larry Correia's, or John Ringo, who's another one you've collaborated with. You have to work your way up there. It doesn't just happen. I think the lessons I take away from that, this doesn't really have to do with your books per se, is like the mistakes a lot of people are making today in the culture in terms of, especially like movies, TV, but also books, is that they're bringing in people trying to make them great from the top down, but they don't have that passion. They don't have that long history. They don't really understand why these things work. Like you were saying, when you're a community, you're like, okay, here's what we can do, here's what we can't, not just in like characters, but like theming. Like what makes a Dragons of Pern book actually work? What are the kind of stories and the way you tell stories? And they're missing that kind of stuff. The legwork, those decades of fandom, working in the fandom mines as you did. It's important.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that fan fiction or fandom is the only way to learn those types of things, but those are necessary. Those are necessary components, I think, to making a compelling story. And for me, fan fiction and participating in the fan fiction community was how I learned them, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So how did you switch from fan fiction author to professional author? How did that switch happen? What's your story there?
I became friends with John Ringo.
I guess that helps. Yeah.
So I mentioned that I went. For anyone watching who's not familiar, DragonCon is a huge. It started off as a science fiction fantasy convention, and it has morphed into like a pop culture multimedia extravaganza convention. Where in Atlanta, it's in Atlanta every year over Labor Day weekend, and it's quite literally you and 50,000 of your closest nerdy friends partying for 5 days in 5 hotels. It is a really, really good time. It is also it's just a lot, right? And I started going to DragonCon in 2001. I haven't gone every year since then, but I've gone most years since then. And I was there in 2004, I believe. And one of the main hotels is the Hyatt Regency Atlanta, and they have since remodeled, but at the time they had kind of like an outdoor balcony area, and that was designated the smoking deck, right? So if that was where people would go to have cigars or cigarettes or whatever.
Yeah, you send the shameful people.
Right.
Goodbye.
Yeah. And so being the shameful person that we are, a couple of buddies of mine and I, which I no longer smoke cigars, but at the time, I did. That was like a fun thing to do every once in a while. And so we were out on the smoking deck, enjoying some cigars, and I got into a conversation with someone who, now let me paint the picture for you, right? I was probably like, it was 2004, so I was 27, and I was like in super good shape and super cute and wearing short little mini skirt and a like t-shirt with like some, provocative innuendo filled saying. Because again, this is what you did at DragonCon, right? So
yeah, especially in the mid 2000s.
You're right, exactly. Yeah, club wear, right? So so that's what I'm looking, and I'm here puffing on this big cigar, and this guy makes some kind of comment about how you don't see a lot of women smoking cigars, and we get into a conversation, and he tells me, you need to meet my friend John, who's sitting over here in the corner. And I was like, sure, I'll meet your friend John. And I had no idea who John was. Well, John turned out to be John Ringo, who is a New York Times bestselling military science fiction author. And this was right, I want to say this was right at the height of his first series, the Posleen series, but I could be wrong. I could be, it's been a while. So, but he was there, a guest at DragonCon, very well known, and he was he was interested to meet me because, again, cute girl, short skirt, but, not in a creepy way, but in just in a sort of like nudge.
It's honest,
yeah, appropriate way, right? I guess. But then we got to talking, and he was like, "Oh, you're a military helicopter pilot. That's really interesting." And so, we started talking, and I introduced him to the friends of mine that I was there with, who were all also all military personnel, most of whom were aviators too. And we became friends, and we bonded. And I've told this story in a couple of other places, and I would feel remiss if I left out this part of it too. So I hope you'll indulge me for a second. But
yeah, no, it's fine.
one of the things that that John said, it was like, he goes, last year there was this like goddess here, because we were still talking about women and cigars, right? And he was like, there was this goddess here who was wearing, she was out here smoking a cigar, and she's wearing this like red leather demon hand bikini, and oh my gosh, what's wrong? And he stopped himself and asked what was wrong, because my eyes had filled with tears, and I was still smiling, like smiling huge, but my eyes had filled with tears. And he was like, what's wrong? And I said, that girl in the red leather bikini, her name was Tammy Archuleta. She was my best friend. And he was like, oh my God, is she here? And I was like, no, John, she was killed in Afghanistan last March. And he was like, oh, yeah. Like it really hit him. And I was like,
that
look,
got really
I didn't mean to make you sad. Like, yeah, it did. And it did at the time too. But I was like, you don't understand. She would have loved, absolutely loved, that was how you described her, that was how you remembered her in, in all her nerdy red leather demon hand bikini glory. You know what I mean? And the fact that was his sort of unsolicited description of her, that was really the thing that we bonded over. And so we, like for the rest of that evening, John joined our group, or we joined his group. I'm not really sure what happened, but we were all hanging out and we started talking, and talked about life and the military and families and kids and like all of the above, right? And so we stayed in touch after that, because it was, it was just sort of like a really cool, one of those really cool experiences that you can kind of, I won't say you can only have them at science fiction conventions, but I've had most of mine at science fiction conventions, right? Where you just connect with someone. And that was one of those experiences. And so we stayed in touch, and he knew, like, just from getting to know me, he knew that I had an academic background in creative writing, and that I did a little writing on the side, but that it wasn't, I wasn't like pursuing a writing career necessarily, because I was busy flying for the Air Force. And fast forward to 2009, I'm deployed actually, and he sends me an email that's like, hey, I am doing this anthology of military science fiction stories written by military veterans, and I want to include some new voices. Do you have anything? And I wrote back, no, but give me 24 hours. And so 24 hours later, I sent him a story that eventually became the story Light, which is in the anthology called Citizens by Baen Books. It came out in 2010, I believe. And so that was my first pro sale. That's how I first started publishing professionally. And then subsequent to that, I didn't really do much with it. Like, I didn't really follow up on that work for a few years, mostly because I was, again, busy flying and having babies and things of that nature. But in right around, I guess it was around 2015, John's big like zombie apocalypse series, for which he's very well known, the Black Tide Rising series, came out. And he got together with editor Gary Poole to do an anthology based in his world, and he invited me to contribute a story, and I did. And that story was called Not in Vain, and that was really sort of the story that like broke my career, I guess, if I can borrow a Hollywood term, because that was the one that really brought me to the attention of the publishers at Baen and Chris Kennedy of Chris Kennedy Publishing, and so that's kind of where I got it started.
Yeah, no, networking is important. It's a big feature, I guess, in anyone's career, especially when it's more niche.
Yeah,
I mean, that personal angle is almost necessary to break in, because I know that doesn't necessarily sound fair to people who don't know someone that can help them in, but it's like there's so few slots, so that's kind of just how things turn out. I like John Ringo a lot. Your story does feel like a story that would fit Mr. Ringo, considering his books and the kind of content he likes to write.
Yeah,
It's pretty cool. So what are the kind of stories that you like to work on these days? What are the projects that interest you as an author and as a nerd?
The things that interest me are the same things that have always interested me, right? I flatter myself that I am a student of human nature and human interaction, because that's what I find the most interesting is what are, you can change the setting, you can change the scenario, but the stuff that's compelling to me is how are people going to react to outside events, and how are they going to react and interact with each other and what do those relationship dynamics look like? So I tend to write very character focused fiction for that reason. And I tend to read very character focused fiction, right? Which is one of the reasons why I am a fan of Larry Correia, and I am a fan of Laurel K. Hamilton, who is in No Game for Knights. I'm just going to flash up the book every time I mention it. It's going to be kind of a silly thing. But Laurel writes fantastic character focused fiction, right? Where it's the characters' decisions and the characters' neuroses and the characters' flaws that really sort of drive the action of the story forward. Same thing with Larry's MHI characters and his Son of the Black Sword characters, very definitely. Same thing with honestly, same thing with Anne McCaffrey's work was very character driven, very focused on the decisions and relationships between the characters. So yeah, that's that might have been too general for what you were looking for.
No, it's just fine. I know that sounds like very back to basics, but I kind of feel like in the greater culture, it feels like the basics are sometimes missing, because I look at some of the like, even we're seeing like the superhero movie format lately. It just feels like the studios think they can chuck out any old thing and people will just swarm to it without doing the groundwork. And it's like, they do enjoy the genre to an extent, but really the genre is just a platform to tell a good story. So you have to have characters that people are interested in. They're three-dimensional. I think my friend Lofty was showing me, they were showing me like the trailer for the Shazam movie and some other superhero movies. They're showing the trailer for now the newly announced Blue Beetle, and it's amazing how much you can basically copy what happens to the Blue Beetle trailer from these other superhero movies. And that is so essential, because when when it's Star Wars, you like Star Wars not just because of the cool spaceships and the laser swords, but you like because you like Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker or Harrison Ford's Han Solo. And this is a mistake Disney kind of made in these new movies, right? It's like you have to have a character that you can latch on to, that you can invest in, because otherwise it's like, how emotionally, like, why bother? Why put your time into this?
Well, and it's not just that. I think it's also that you have to be invested in that character's choices for whatever reason, particularly as relates to the other characters that are going on, right? In my mind, one of the most compelling things about the original trilogy in Star Wars were the dynamics between Han and Leia, right? And now part of that is, to be clear, I am a romance novel fan. I read romance novels and love the whole, are they going to get together? Are they going to get together? Okay, they got together and it's a happy ending, right? Like, it's formulaic, but it's formulaic for a reason, because that's what the fans want. Well, the reason the fans want that is because that sort of fantasy, and it is a fantasy, not to say that it can't happen in real life, because, I have my own happily ever after going on right now, thank goodness. But it is a fantasy, right? And it's a fantasy that we as humans can all identify with, and it's something that we crave, right? Everybody craves acceptance. Everybody craves, love. Everybody craves being desired by the person that they desire as well. And so it's that universality of it that makes those types of relationship dynamics so relatable and understandable to the crowd, to the audience, to the viewer, and that's the kind of thing that makes people really come back, really get invested in a series, or whether it's a book series or a movie series or even a TV series. I'll give you another perfect example. Have you ever watched The Office?
I have, yes. I have.
Okay.
Like any red-blooded adult of my age or generation, I have seen The Office.
Exactly. Now, I will tell you the moment that I got hooked on The Office, and it was, so I watched the first season, again, while I was deployed, right? You watch a lot of TV while you're deployed. I watched the first season while I was deployed because I had never seen it, and a friend of mine by the name of Jack Swinehart was like, you have to watch this. You're going to love it. And the first season was so cringy, right? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy, Michael, is so awkward. Like, it's almost painful to watch him do these things because it's like, I'm embarrassed for him. But I think it was either the end of the first season or the end of the second season where like I really got invested in it. And that was because it was one of the episodes where you know that Jim has this like hella crush on Pam, and Pam is sort of oblivious, but she likes spending time with him and you know, because it's fun, they're work friends or whatever. And then like there's some like work party and I think she gets a little tipsy or something. And then she like kisses him or almost kisses him in the parking lot, something like that. But there's some indication that she actually returns his regard. And that right there set the hook for me, because it's like, oh, okay, there is a relationship dynamic here that I am invested in, that I am interested in, because I can relate it to my own life and my own desires and my own needs as a human being for, you know, love and acceptance and you know, being with someone who wants to be with me, etc. Now, that's not to say that that's the only reason I loved the show. There were many, many reasons I loved the show, but that was the first, right? That was the thing that really first set me. So to bring it back to our discussion about the Star Wars sequels, one of the things where I think that that the series really had potential, the sequels really had potential, and it kind of fell flat, was in the dynamic between Rey and Kylo Ren, right? I'm not saying that you had to have them have a romance. You didn't have to have them have a romance, but you had to have them.
That though will make the Reylos sad. They really
well, and you know what? Maybe a romance would have been one way to do this, though. Honestly, it absolutely would have been one way to do this. What you did need to do, though, was follow through, okay? Because you set it up. You set them up as foils for each other, and you set them up to have some kind of really deep, impactful, some kind of really deep, impactful, what's the word I'm looking for? Dynamic, like relationship with each other, whether it's romantic or, you know, enemies to allies or, you know, just mirror images of each other. And there was all this promise there. And then at the end, there just really wasn't anything, right? Like there was, I think we ended up getting like one kiss and a surprise smile, and then he's dead. So spoiler alert.
It was a major failure to fire Chekhov's gun.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and that was one of the missed opportunities of that series, because again, going back to the original series, what we loved so much was the interaction and the dynamics between the characters. Not just Leia and Han, although I loved Leia and Han because I'm a romance fan, but I also loved Han and Luke, right? The whole naive farm kid, too big for his britches, and the naive but talented farm kid, too big for his britches, and the hard-bitten, world-weary smuggler telling him, don't get cocky, kid, right? Great kid, don't get cocky. You know, that's the classic dynamic that, you know, is something that all of us as humans can relate to. And we missed that in the sequels. And I think that that's part of the reason the sequels were disappointing to a lot of people.
For many reasons, but that is a good point. And you could tell when J.J. Abrams was trying to resuscitate the trilogy in that last movie, because that's basically what Rise of Skywalker is. It's like him trying to give CPR to Star Wars. They tried to like fake this like deep buddy friendship kind of dynamic between the three main leads, and it just was totally unbelievable because that hadn't been there, and
they hadn't done the groundwork, right?
Movies. Yeah, in fact, I don't know if there was a part before Rise of Skywalker that Poe, Rey, and now all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank. Finn, thank you. I don't think there was a moment that those three were actually together in either Force Awakens or Last Jedi. Someone can correct me on that if I'm wrong. So it was like, and it just felt false. It felt forced, and it was just one of many reasons why that movie was kind of a turnoff for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, what guides you these days? So how do you get invested, or where do your ideas come from? What makes you want to work on a project? Like, where do you get your inspiration from as an author and writer?
I wish I knew. I wish I could distill it down and say this, you know, but the truth is I get bits of inspiration from anywhere, from lots of things, right? You know, it could be a lyric in a song that like sparks something in my head. It could be, a cutscene in a video game that, it makes me think, well, what if it had gone a different way? Or what if this had happened instead? It could be just the feel, the vibe of it. The whole reason that I did these, so this is actually the second in a trilogy of anthologies. I actually just turned in the third one last month. So we're expecting the third noir anthology edited by me and Larry Correia to come out in January of 2024. And that one will be called Down These Mean Streets. But the whole reason that I did these anthologies was because I read a book by Raymond Chandler and fell in love with the feeling of noir and the kind of the vibe of it, the sort of like, dirty underbelly of society and what kind of relationships, what kind of dynamics, what kind of interactions happen in this sort of underbelly. And honestly, I read the book by Raymond Chandler. I went on sort of like a deep dive of noir, watching like a whole string of noir films, and reading a whole bunch of noir stories and noir books, and discussing it with my friends. I mean, I'm sure they were sick of me talking about detectives and femme fatales for like the year and a half that I did this. And then I ended up writing a story. And then I wrote the story and I was like, this is a damn good story. I don't know where to put it. I don't know where to send it. But I had just done, this was like in 2015 or 16. And I had just submitted the Black Tide Rising story. And I was like, man, I wish someone at Bain should do an anthology. And that got my wheels turning. And so I was like, the next year when I went to LibertyCon, I had read in my deep dive, I had read Larry Correia's Grim Noir series, because it's like an urban fantasy, like a past urban fantasy noir, if that makes sense, right? It's set in the like 1930s. Phenomenal series. Highly recommended, especially if you're a fan of the noir subgenre, because he hits all the notes, right? And still has those compelling character interactions and character dynamics that just make you, root for these people. They're your friends. You want them to win. And sometimes even the bad guys, that's my favorite, honestly. If you can present a villain in a sympathetic light to where I can understand why they're doing the things that they do, that's chef's kiss good, right? So anyway, I digress. The point is, I went to LibertyCon, and again, the value of networking. I knew that Larry was going, so I reached out to the programming director, Rich Groller, and said, hey, Rich, I have an idea panel about noir and science fiction and fantasy fiction, and I'm happy to moderate it, and I think Larry should be on it because he's one of the guests of honor this year. And Rich was like, that's a great idea. So we did this panel, and it was funny too because I dressed up as like the femme fatale for the panel, right? Because it's part of the whole show. So I had like the backseam stockings and the pencil skirt, and the only thing I was missing was like I didn't have like a birdcage veil. I didn't have time to get one, but I wish I had. But we were there and did the panel, and it was well attended, and people really liked it. And then afterwards, it just so happened that we had Bain does a dinner for their authors at LibertyCon every year, and that was immediately following the panel. And so after the panel, I went up to Larry and I was like, hey, that was really fun. Did you enjoy it? And he was like, yeah, that was a great panel. You did a great job. I was like, thanks. So I have this idea, and I think we could make a lot of money, and I'll do all the work, and you can put your name on it. And he was like, okay, tell me more. So that's how I convinced him to work with me on the first one, which was Noir Fatale. And it was all because I had really been inspired by this question of, because here's the thing, noir exists because society is always going to have that dirty underbelly, right? Like anytime you have humans in close proximity to each other, you're going to have kind of a dark side to it. Because humans have dark sides to us, right? We're multidimensional beings. We're all three-dimensional. None of us are all good or all bad. There's always some gray in there. So if you have a fantasy society or you have a science fiction society, what does the noir of that look like? And that was the idea that inspired me to ask that question, to write that story, and then to want to do these anthologies and find out what other authors, what that looked like to them. So we did Noir Fatale, which focused on the character archetype of the femme fatale. So this is the second one, and it focuses on the character archetype of the kind of hard-bitten, hard-boiled noir detective, right? The truth seeker. I call him the Gray Knight because he's not all good either. He usually has a little bit of a rough and tumble side. And and then the third one, like I said, which I just turned in the manuscript for, is going to be called Down These Mean Streets, and that one focuses on the archetype of the noir city. What does that look like in a fantasy setting or a science fiction setting or an alternate history setting, because we have a couple of alternate history stories in that too. So, and again, all of that came from this, just this inspiration from reading another creative work. So I guess the really like short story long version of the answer to your question is I'm inspired by other creative works, honestly, and kind of extrapolating ideas from them.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. I think I have the problem of people if I'm engaged on a project, especially a bigger project, journalistically, I have the problem of trying to work it out kind of out loud, and so I do overshare with all the people around me, and they're kind enough to put up with me to listen to it. I love noir. Yeah, I know. I'm glad you could relate to that because I feel guilty sometimes. It's like, I'm sorry, I talk about this all the time, guys. Uh, Noir is a great genre. Like you said, it kind of showcases the shadows that
Mm-hmm.
don't get seen. I think it's also really interesting if you ever look. I think noir is going to have it's going to come back really big because I look at the history of noir when it was big, like it's say in film. It's big in the 20s after after the big recession started, the Great Depression. You look internationally, like in Japan, after they lose World War II
Mm-hmm.
and they're being rebuilt up, that there's a giant wave of noir in their country. And you can see this across the world. Noir shows up anytime there's like big social upheaval or economic distress. I think everything going on with AI and the economy. So I think noir is going to come back in a big way. So that maybe, who knows? Who knows? I could be wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I think we are going to see a bit of a resurgence. I mean, I would argue that it never fully went away, because you can look at a bunch of action movies from the 80s, right? A lot of them fall into the category of noir. And noir has a couple of hallmarks that, again, I think are somewhat universal, right? Some of them are those character archetypes that I mentioned, but a lot of them are, like you said, the setting of, okay, maybe there's been, some economic depression going on. Usually we're in the aftermath of a big war. Oftentimes the main character is a veteran themselves, of some type of, if not a military veteran, they're a veteran police officer, or they have some type of past experience that includes violence as part of the daily job description. And I think that is something that fascinates us as humans, because we are capable of incredible violence towards one another. It's not a pretty thing, but it is an essential part of our makeup. And that's something that, because it is an essential part of our makeup, that we are endlessly fascinated by, fascinated and horrified by, if that makes sense. So yeah, I agree. At least I hope we're going to see a little bit of a resurgence, because I love it. I love exploring that sort of aspect of our society, that sort of aspect of our nature as human beings.
So this is a good, we were talking about resurgence in the genre of noir. Here's something that I tried asking this last time I spoke with Patrick Chillas. How do you think what we're seeing with like ChatGPT, the large language models, and generative AI in general, how do you think it's going to impact our industry and the kind of content we see? Because, there are magazines now, science fiction magazines, that are closing submissions, or are they're raising kind of like the bar you have to pass to get a submission through, because ChatGPT enables so many people to put out, moderate to bad science fiction or whatever genre they're working on. How do you think this is all going to impact like what you do and the genre in general?
Oh, well, so those are two separate questions, right? How it's going to impact what I do, it's not. I'm going to continue writing the stories that I want to read. I'm going to continue developing my craft as best I can, because I'm a firm believer that professionals invest in professional development. And I never want to stop learning, right? I never want to get better. I want to level up with every book that I write. So as far as what I do differently, nothing. Now that being said, I will say that I have utilized AI generated images as inspiration images for my stories. And that's actually been very helpful for my storytelling process. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So when I'm writing a story and I have a picture in my head of, okay, this is what this character looks like, it has been helpful for me to actually, go into, I use Midjourney because I have a Discord server, and I just use the bot there to go into Midjourney and describe the character the way I see them in my head, and come up with an AI generated image that best matches. And then I have that picture that I include in their character sheet. And that's helpful for me. It's same thing, but even more so with like locations, right? So in my current work in progress, there's a like a cave in a forest that's been used as a supply cache. And so I created an AI generated Midjourney image of this cave, and it's not exactly what matches in my head, but it's close enough that it looks cool, and it kind of sparks that feeling in my head, brings me to that mindset of writing where I need to be, where I can like put myself in that cave. And so I've included it in my World Bible as, okay, this is sort of what this place looks like. And I know, I mean, we could talk all day long about whether AI generated art is the same as AI generated stories and yada, yada, yada. And that's a rabbit hole that honestly, I probably don't really want to go down. But, but the truth is, I don't know for sure how it's going to impact the wider literature community, other than to say that it is going to impact the wider literature community, and we're already seeing that, right? But one of the things that I think that we recently saw, and by recently I mean in the last 20 years, is that with the advent and the rise of Amazon self-publishing and how easy it became to self-publish, we kind of saw that the traditional gatekeepers of what is a good story, what gets published, what gets into the hands of other readers, those gatekeepers really got sidestepped like a lot, right? Because I no longer had
huge positive, like we talked about Larry Correia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm indie published. Larry started off, self-publishing. Several of my favorite authors are self-published. And it's a great thing. But it also is a very egalitarian thing, right? Because for every great self-published author that's out there, there's a self-published author who is not ready for prime time. You know what I mean? Is not ready for other people to see their book, but they, have the ability, and they put it out there and they get it published. And because that's just, you can do that now. What I think that we're going to see with the rise of AI generated stories is, I think we're going to see a resurgence of gatekeeping. And it's going to be as much about, are you a human as it is about, is your story any good? Now the question is, how are they going to tell? And I don't know the answer to that, right? But all I know is, like, to go back to the other half of your question, I am going to continue selling writing and attempting to sell the stories that I want to read, that I find interesting, that are the best that I can make them. And I would encourage other writers and other creatives to do the same, right? My Midjourney art that I use for inspirational purposes is beautiful, and it's great, and it's fun. It's not human made. There is a difference, right? Like, you can see there is a difference in quality between the images that AI can generate and the amazing cover images made by cover artists. So I would argue that we as writers and creatives, the worst thing that we can do is try to fight against this technology, and the best thing that we can do is try to figure out how to best utilize it, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. It's a big question for me too. I think the people like yourself, I think people who are socially urbane, who, in many ways were already doing a lot of this themselves. And so, they're already the Swiss Army utility knife. And so it's just like this is just like another tool in your arsenal. You guys, the area you work in is niche enough that I think that provides some protection. I think what I work in journalism, though, is because the demand for what we do is different. Really, if you're a journalist, For the most
Yeah,
part, people aren't reading your stuff because it's you. They're reading their stuff because the information it conveys. That's different than
exactly.
author relationship. But
Yeah.
I see the negatives and the positives. GBT for me, it's not really good at generating original ideas or very interesting copy, but it does have use for me for like being a copy editor or if I want to try a different idea out. And I
Yeah.
can see a lot of the positives, but I can also understand why people are scared and they feel like,
Well, yeah, absolutely.
no, it feels like if you're in an industry and you're already kind of like treading water like mine is, it's just like, and then there's this robot who can do 90% of what you can do,
Yeah.
but for free.
Yeah.
That's like, how do you even fight against that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the answer is honestly, you can't, right? You have to find a way to either work with it and capitalize on it or pivot and sidestep and do something else as an industry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it makes me think
Tough question.
it is. It is. And you know, the debate around art, it just makes me think back to because I'm old enough to remember when um uh digital art first really like broke on the scene and everyone was like, oh my gosh, is this art? Is it not art? They're not even, they're not painting or drawing, they're or taking photographs, they're just, you know moving pixels around. Anybody could do this. Well, I don't think that's true. Not anybody can create, compelling digital art, just the same as not anybody can create compelling stories. But there was a big like concern that this was going to be the end of the traditional artist. And we'll never see the end of the traditional artist. I think if anything else, we'll just see another medium exist for artists and by extension writers. Now, whether that means, a prompt crafter, I don't know. I don't know if that's what that looks like. Um, but I do know it's not going away. But neither are stories, right? Neither are the
Yeah.
need to tell stories. Neither is the need to, um, to read something by someone that you identify with, that you resonate with, that you, kind of connect with because you know their voice, you know their stories, you know that they like the kinds of things that you like, that they're going to give you the reading experience that you like, um, yeah, it's the difference between reading an Anne McCaffrey dragon book and reading one of my fellow fan fiction authors' stories, right? Great stories, love their characters. It's not Anne McCaffrey because it's not her voice, and that I think is where the distinction lies.
I completely agree. Like you're saying, inspiration gets the gears trained. The gears in my head, those little gerbils, they're overworked and underpaid. I said too, for that matter. I was thinking it was just like the history of fiction and like author attributed. You can even go back like who wrote the Shakespeare plays, or you think about Arthur Conan Doyle. That after Sherlock Holmes got really big, there were so many copycat authors. Some people who just outright wrote it as a Sherlock Holmes story, and the majority of those are forgotten. They're in the dust. But the ones we care about are the ones generally made by the author. So I think you're right. I think there is value in authorship. I think there is value in, and maybe it's like, even if it's good enough, it's just not quite the same.
Yeah.
And I think even if, for example, if, I don't know, copyright law massively changed, I think still to that degree, people wouldn't be as interested in the copycat as they would be in the real deal.
Well, but that's not to say there's not a place for it, too. So let me paint another picture for you, right? One of the things that I've observed is that the authors that are doing well in this world of anybody can put their book up on Amazon at any point in time are the authors that are able to build and maintain a vibrant fan community, right? We talk about marketing, talk about ads, Amazon ads, Facebook ads, all of those things. It's been my observation that none of those methods are enough in and of themselves. All of those methods have to drive your fans to identifying with you as a creator and making them want to read your stuff. They want your voice. They want your content. So I think that the line that we're going to see, and we're already seeing this, right? The line that we're going to see between author and content creator, and between artist and content creator is going to blur significantly. Now, that being said, suppose we have a scenario like this where you have, a successful self-published author who writes their book, commissions art, from a digital artist for their book covers, and participates in the economic ecosystem of self-published creators that way, right? But in addition to that, as part of their fan community, they also have some kind of membership, called Patreon or some other mechanism, where they have these super fans who have decided that it is worth their entertainment dollar to have one of these memberships to get exclusive content generated from that author from those stories. One of the things that I could see as a legitimate use of AI generated art is to take those inspiration pictures, like what I use, and release them to those fans as, hey, these are my AI generated character portraits. What do you think the character looks like? And by that way reward membership or reward your members who are willing to, further support you, your patrons who are willing to further support you as super fans, etc. I think we're going to see, that's what I mean when I say I think we're going to see the lines blur, right? Because authors are already having to become more than just authors. The days are gone of, okay, you just write a book, you ship it off to your editor, and then, 6 months later, a royalty check shows up. That doesn't happen anymore. Not for the majority, not for anyone I know, right? Even Larry Correia, who is a perpetual bestseller, guy buys a mountain, etc. He's a content creator as well. He posts regularly on his blog. He interacts regularly with his fans. He does, he has a Writer Dojo podcast, which he, it's an instructional podcast, but it's also a mechanism for him to interact with his fans, which is, what they want in order to be part of his community, to continue and have his voice and get that dopamine hit, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, like I said, authors are having to become content creators on more than just one level, and I think that we're going to see. I think that you can find ethical areas in which to use AI generated art and even AI generated text, right? For things like that. It's not, you're not asking someone to pay for a book that's not in your voice, but or you're not asking someone to, pay for cover art that was generated by AI that isn't supporting an artist. But you're just offering bonuses for those who might choose to use them, might choose to find them interesting.
I think that's a good observation, that there is this expectation now that if you are a creator of some kind, that you have to be kind of all access. You have to have a broad palette of content available. Yeah, it's a good observation. And I think you're right. I think because content generation is just made so much easier with these technologies, that's hopefully going to reduce some of the burden on people like you, so that you're doing less time trying to feed that community targeted content all the time, and you can focus a bit more on the writing. Mm-hmm. Makes you ask all kinds of questions. It's like, what is the value exactly there? But you are right, that is the world we live in. I mean, hustle culture is just now the norm, which I know if you're a creative and you're a book author, you're in that area. I work as a journalist. You think of the halcyon days where people they would go to the club and have coffee and drink their little martinis with their buddies, and then at night on the veranda they'd write their column and they send it in the mail, and that would be it. I mean, that does sound wonderful. I'll admit, I kind of would love that. Well, I can't drink, you know what I mean? But that's just not the reality we live in. You can fight against it, or you could accept it.
Yeah, right. And I don't know. I could you grabbed one of my, I hate to use this term, but you grabbed, one of my trigger words too, because I have all kinds of thoughts about hustle culture as well. So, but you're not wrong, right? You're not wrong in that it's, it's, if I'm going to get people to buy my books, I need them to identify with me. If they're going to identify with me, they need to get to know me. And that means putting more of myself out into the world. And what form that takes, we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm sure for science fiction authors who maybe personality-wise aren't super out there. They aren't really extroverts.
Yeah.
That kind of reach. I know it's a hard reach for me because I'm pretty much an introvert, and so trying to put myself out there can be difficult. But
Yeah.
and it gets easier. It gets easier. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time. This was fascinating. These are some of the things here at the end here are big questions, but they're pretty important ones.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what the world of tomorrow looks like. I know in my own workflow, I know for a lot of people who are struggling with disability, these technologies have been really positive, life-changing for some people. So
Yeah.
I know that you and the people at Bain, who have been partners with us on this podcast and arranging interviews, um, you guys are really good at utilizing new technologies and keeping up with it and really letting each author have their own voice. So I'm excited to see how these technologies, how you utilize it, how your collaborators use it. I think it'll be pretty interesting. Okay, so here I would like to end here. So Anne McCaffrey, what is it about Anne McCaffrey and the Dragons of Pern books that work? Because I was thinking about this after I read your bio last night on your website. You said you were in these books. I was like, they are kind of weird books. They kind of fit in a weird area. They're like a little bit of military. They're kind of fantasy. They're a little bit of sci-fi. Some books it's about people riding dragons. Other books it's like some choir boy whose voice changed so he can no longer be in choir, and it's like, and he becomes like a priest or something. They're crazy. They're crazy books, and like,
Yeah.
and that's not even getting into the stuff that maybe isn't even YouTube friendly. She's kind of all over the place, but it's weird because those books kind of work.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I find compelling about Anne McCaffrey's books. And it's the same thing that I said at the beginning of the podcast. It's the relationships, right? So, I was kind of a nerdy kid. I was, I always had my nose in a book. I as many military brats do, I developed the skill set to make friends quickly, but I never had like a ton of friends, right? And I was always a little weird because I was always reading and I always, I was a weird kid. And the idea of a relationship with this incredibly powerful being that knew every facet of me, that knew my every thought and loved me unconditionally was so compelling to nerdy 12-year-old me who, was traveling around the world with her family, having to make new friends every 3 years, having great experiences, but still missing home and missing the people I left behind at the last base or whatever. And that's what really cinched it for me. That's what made me want a dragon, is because I wanted that kind of deep understanding and unconditional love and acceptance. And I think that again is sort of a universal desire for us as people, right? We all want to be seen. We all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted for who and what we are, with no judgment. And so much the better if it's by this being that can literally breathe fire, so, and a being that chooses you, right? Like they're born and they choose their riders, and that moment of being chosen, of being the one that's the perfect match. That's the kicker, right? That's the bit that got me. And even Anne's books about that didn't center around the dragons, like the Harper Hall trilogy, the YA trilogy I mentioned that I first read. You still had that because you still had these fire lizards that would bond with each other, and you had these incredible interactions between the characters where these friendships would form and these people would trust each other with sensitive information or with their lives, or have to learn to trust each other. It was all magical. So
Yeah. I really enjoyed them as a kid. I have not read them in quite some time, but part of me almost wants to go back and see if there are any I missed.
They're worth a reread, but a caution. Remember, she was writing in the 60s, so some of the social mores are like not the same as we would have today.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Do you think it's one of the issues? Like they do decently well even now, but I'm surprised, or maybe not surprised. There's never really been like a adaptation. There's no TV show. There's no movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've started a couple times. They've, but it's just never fully worked out. It'd be cool to see.
Yeah, if it could be done. Yeah, it could would be cool to see if it's a smart creative and they can really focus in on it.
Yeah.
Who knows? All right, Casey. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. Where can people
Thank
find
you
you
for
and
having me.
your projects?
Okay, so all of my books are on Amazon. You can search me out on Amazon, but the best place probably to start would be my website. It's kaceyezell.net or .com. I own them both. You're welcome to use either. And from there, you can find links to all of my books, as well as my sorely neglected blog. But you can also find a link to my YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel called Kacey Ezell Writer Life that is about my life as a writer. So I started it kind of to document my transition from being a military officer into civilian life and being a writer and stuff. So I have quite a bit of content up there. Hope you can go there and enjoy that. And then I also, for my members of my mailing list, which you can, if you go to my website, you can click on a link called Free Stories. It'll take you to a sign up for my mailing list. You can sign up and get a couple of free stories set in a couple of different universes. But you can also, when you sign up for my mailing list, you'll get a Discord invite to my private Discord server that is just for my friends and fans, where we interact every day and do fun Midjourney art challenges and talk about creativity and tools and tricks and journal prompts and basically everything. So go check those out.
Cool. Are you on Twitter at all? Or
I am, yeah. Kacey at Kacey Ezell1. So yeah.
all right. Well, all of you should go check out Casey's work. She's a fantastic author. I really appreciate her taking the time to speak with us today. And until next time, my friends, please keep geeking out.